At this time, please join me in welcoming to the stage Colonel Mike Warlick, United States Marine Corps retired Vice President, AFCEA International.
My first thoughts are, gentlemen, please take your seats. Good morning. What's the magic word of the week? SEMA. This is our third day, and this is also going to be another day that you've experienced 2 days earlier. It's going to be busy, it's going to be interesting, it's going to be full of education, and there will be some entertainment, I'm sure. You'll see a recap as we go through this morning as I talk about what's going to take place today. You can also go into our app, and we've advertised that quite heavily over the week, and this really provides you a great piece of software to pick the session that you want to attend and ensure that you're not late for the ones that you especially want to be there. I want to cover this the first couple of days so that we set the stage, and most of you have been here all week. But we started on Tuesday with General Morrison, who provided an overview of the theme for the most part and where we're going to take this the program this week. He was followed by General Funk via VTC, who provided an operator's perspective, and he really did a great job setting the stage for not just the operator's perspective, but some of the questions that center around the command and control challenges that we have and will have going into the future. We also had a great panel that was supported in the afternoon. We had Lieutenant General Nakasone, who came, was the primary keynote of the afternoon, and he's focused on the evolution of cyber within the Army and all the activities that are heading this way. He also noted a little bit about the joint emphasis that's out there. He came from that environment, so he was able to share some thoughts about what the other services are doing. So all in all, that was a great day. Day two, we started with operationalizing C4ISR. Major General Taylor led that great panel, and they talked about, these are people that you've been familiar with for years that were here. We had a Chief of Staff, Colonel Stoddard, who was here from PEO EIS. We had Gary Martin. We had Mr. Wiltsey there. It was just a great session. And it also set the stage for the challenges that are out there with not only delivery, but maintenance and also operators' ability to act. In the afternoon, we had Lieutenant General Bowman come in for our SEMA panel yesterday. That was another great panel, a very challenging panel, if I might say, that also set the stage for the week. And for us, I think it was really kind of the capstone of what we're trying to do over the course of the week. We had a women's and cyber panel yesterday. We also had a reception as a part of that. Throughout the entire week, we've had multiple sessions out here. If there's a complaint, it's that I can't do everything. That really is the challenge, and so we certainly take that as an area to take a look at next year. But we were happy to have General Baker on that panel yesterday afternoon, among others, who had traveled quite extensively to get in here for the session, and Major General Frost also was a part of that. So at this point, we're now moving into the third day. We're going to start out, this is really a CIO day in many respects. We're going to start out with the panel here in just a few minutes, and you're going to get a perspective on the challenges and the changes and what's happening within the Army CIO environment. We want to first start, though, by thanking Fortinet for sponsoring this morning's coffee, and I'm sure you needed it to start at 8 o'clock this morning. We're going to have a brunch break on the exhibit floor this morning, so you can go down and enjoy that. Lunch is a grab and go, a little bit unlike yesterday, which was also essentially a grab and go. It'll be just kind of a light refreshment type of a luncheon, if you will. We want to thank CenturyLink for sponsoring today's lunch, as I just mentioned, and again, it's the grab and go style. In between sessions this morning, we really want you to get down on the exhibit floor. We will have time for you to do that. It is your last opportunity to engage with our industry that have been here for the week. For the most part, they have been very happy with the performance and the activity that they've had around their booths. And that's up here. That's also down on the exhibit floor. I want to mention one event that's down the road, and you'll hear that probably at the end of the day. But training and education is something that has permeated a lot of the discussion here. Moving into the cyber environment and how the government's training is one aspect, how the industry's training for cyber is another one, and then how they do it in the colleges and in the schools. So we have come up with an idea to host a training symposium. The title of it is Cyber Education, Research, and Training Symposium. What a great acronym, CERTS. We need to have CERTS to be professional. So we're going to host this event January 17th and 18th. I'd like you to mark that on the calendar. Look at the AFCEA website. The program for this is going to evolve very, very soon. And I think it's going to be a one-of-a-kind event to get started on how do we address the training and how is it interactive and how the service is doing this together to make sure that we're heading down the right path. Okay, we've got one more thing before we start this morning. I want to invite Mr. Ed Velez up to the podium. He's the president of the AFCEA Augusta Fort Gordon chapter to present a couple of awards.
Thank you, Mike. Look at my notes because I don't want to mess this one up. This one's important. So we have two recipients at the part of the Fort Gordon chapter. The first one is acknowledging the scholar receiving the Lieutenant General Douglas Buckhulst Memorial Scholarship. And the recipient is Sergeant Hugh from the Cyber Protection Brigade. I don't believe the sergeant's here, is he? Okay. The second one is the Young AFCEA 40 Under 40 Award, and it's given to 40 individuals age 40 and under, and this is selected from across all of AFCEA for their significant contributions in a technical science, technology, engineering, and mathematics STEM field by providing innovation, thought leadership, and support to their client organization using information technology. Captain, would you join me up here? So our chapter is proud to recognize Captain Chris Apsey as the Young AFCEA 40 Under 40 winner. Captain Apsey currently serves as the Deputy Director of the Cyber Technical College at the Army Cyber School. He's the primary architect behind the Cyber School's design and implementation of broadband handrail, a holistic integrated approach to cyber training and education. Let's hear it again for Captain Apsey. Thank you very much.
I think we know why the sergeant wasn't here this morning. His wife is due any moment. Okay. Put the glasses back on and we'll be ready to roll. So this morning, we're going to introduce a great panel that's going to be moderated by Major General Yi. General Yi works up as the Director of Army Security, Cybersecurity in the CIO G6, and I think most people here know that. Prior to joining the CIO G6, General Yi was the commander of 335th Signal Command in Kuwait, where he concurrently served as the G6 for U.S. Army Central Command, the CJ6 for Coalition Joint Forces Land Component Command, and the Director of Cyber Information Systems for the Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve. He's led an Army network modernization for the CIO G6 since July 2015. I know there's probably not a day that goes by where there are questions. General Yi reports directly to the CIO G6 and assists the development of strategy, policy, and guidance for the Army ongoing efforts to modernize and improve the network for cybersecurity. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Major General Yi and his panel. Welcome.
Hey. Hey, thanks. Thanks, Mike. You know, it's kind of early for a symposium, so I give it, a little shout out to you all for getting here at, at 0:30 according to Wayne Brock yesterday. And if you'll notice, we all are in the same uniform. That's right. Me and you all. The panel didn't get the memo. I was joking last night, and I saw a few, friends, use that term very carefully, and they said they'd be here this morning. I know Wayne was one of them, but did Gerald Williams make it up this morning? Huh? Hey, what about Tom Brady? Where's Tom? All right, Adrian, all right, you made it. All right. Another Tom out there somewhere I saw last night somewhere walking around in the lobby area. All right, there you are, okay. It's good to see, Rob and Todd, Bill, John Shea. Saw John Rose and I somewhere here this morning too, walking around. So good for you, John, waking up, even though you're from South Carolina. That's all right. And today is CIO Day, and so it just turns out to be that way, and we're glad to be here. And let me tell you, it's busy right now in the Pentagon and all your lives as well. And so busy that just yesterday, the three of us on this end, we're in a meeting yesterday morning and then talking through the afternoon and said, oh man, we got to catch a flight and come on down. And I would have been here earlier yesterday except for we got pulled into a meeting, and so we had to change our flights to make sure that we could be there to come on down. And so we appreciate being here today. And for those of you that were, it kind of feels like church, you got up early, came to church this morning. The front rows are empty, but we do appreciate you coming here. Thanks to AFCEA for hosting this great event this week. From what I can tell, the feedback that I got yesterday evening is that it's kind of a growing sense of goodness, and maybe, Alan, good to see you. Thank you for last night. A growing sense of, hey, maybe we're bringing back some of that goodness that the Land War Net used to have. And so thanks to AFCEA for your leadership. And thanks for Cindy. I'm not sure where Cindy's at, but she helped us today as well. My role in the G6, I got a couple of hats that I wear. I have the Cybersecurity Directorate, which is all things you don't like. It's RMF, it's ATOs, it's FISMA compliance, it's cross domains, it's you name it, and it's painful in your life. And so I have that role for the time being. I also have the network modernization piece, which has the Windows 10, which we're glad to not talk about Windows 10 today. It's got the infrastructure upgrades, it's got data center closures, apps migration, cloud. So it's kind of a broad portfolio at the moment. And so we are busy. Let me tell you, every day we're very, very busy. Thanks to our distinguished panel members here, a good-looking group of folks here. We'll talk more about them in a few minutes for carving some time out of their busy day, because let me tell you what, as I said yesterday, we thought we were going to be here earlier yesterday, and we had to change our plans. We had to, how the rules of the Potomac work, right? And Rob knows this. 4 stars is more than 3. 3 is more than 2, right? And so when the 4-star plans change, well, then our plans change just right on down the line. How you doing, Hannah? Okay, so more about the panel in a few minutes. Most of us have spent a few days in the Army, and based upon your ability to wake up early in the morning, you know about how when the Army grew its network, right? All the individual DUMs, and believe it or not, there's a few DUMs left out there with that acronym, but it grew up with a bunch of little separate fiefdoms, and each little DUM was its own little, world, own little security enclave, et cetera. And over the past several years, a lot of goodness, we've been bringing that back together, bringing it under a single umbrella under NETCOM for much of the Army. The rest of the Army still has a ways to go to come under a single enterprise. But in doing so, it's been painful. We all know the goodness of bringing them all together. And we all know that makes sense. We're just not done yet. And it'll probably be ongoing for a few more years until we get to a place where it is a single enterprise network. We like to believe it's a single enterprise today, but we know that it's not. We know that it's a lot of separate networks that we kind of cobble together, and in the process that we call network modernization, which is really the infrastructure upgrade, is about the MPLS mesh upgrade, the backbone. It's about the joint regional security stacks. And for the Army, it's about upgrading the campus area networks, so the ICANN piece of it. And as you'll hear from our panel, there's a lot more than just that alone. So there's a lot that we are going through. When we talk about network modernization, and it's about standards. So we'll talk about some of the challenges that we are going through in standardizing the network. So can we have our first slide up? Next slide. Okay, so who's heard of Buffalo theory? All right, so one person, okay, that's my helper here. So I'll read it to you for those of you who are in the back. It says, well, you see, Norm, it's like this. A herd of buffalo can only move as fast as the slowest buffalo. And when the herd is hunted, it's the slowest and the weakest ones at the back that are killed first. That's natural selection, which is good for the herd as a whole because the general speed and health of the whole group keeps improving by the regular killing of the weakest members. In much the same way, the human brain can only operate as fast as the slowest brain cells. Now, as we know, excessive intake of alcohol, Gerald Williams, kills brain cells. But naturally, it attacks the slowest and weakest brain cells first. In this way, regular consumption of beer eliminates the weaker brain cells, making the brain a faster and more efficient machine. And that, Norm, is why you feel smarter after a few beers. So, I know a few of us are smarter than others in this room after the last couple of days at TechNet, from what I understand. But if there were a third paragraph in there, it would say, in much the same way, the network can only operate as secure as the weakest link, right? And so what we're doing with network modernization is we're going through and reducing all those unsecure points in the network, whether it be an aged out switch or a router or a firewall or you name it. And so in a way, this group we have up here are buffalo hunters. So welcome to the buffalo hunters today. And let me tell you, before we assemble this panel, one of the criteria was taking them to the range to see their buffalo hunting skills. And so let me tell you more to follow on that. And I'm not going to give you the analogy that this is a herd of buffalo and it's only the weakest link. I'm not going to go there. I'll let you all go there on your own, but I'm not going there. All right? So the network over the past several years has begun this process of migrating to the joint regional security stacks, right, the JRSS. We're going to talk a bit about that in a minute. But it's been challenging at times. Not going to sugarcoat it, but there's been a lot of goodness in doing so. And if it were easy, it would be done already. And the fact that we have 5 different organizations represented here trying to achieve this effort just kind of shows you how complicated that is. But the goodness is we have the right people working at it, and we are making progress. The last couple of years, we've actually moved a number of bases, and we'll talk more about that, behind the joint regional security stacks. And we've seen the benefit. Now we've seen, we've learned along the way, but we've also seen the benefit. And there's no option other than to continue moving forward. I will say one thing, that if you feel pain in this migration process, and maybe some of you have, pain is only a weakness leaving the network, right? Right? So next slide. So who is this fancy team of panel members that we have today? Well, let me find my slide deck here with the name of our team members. Okay, here. Holy cow. Okay. Get to Chuck. All right, so Colonel Chalfant, Air Force brat, serves as the Army CIO G6 Enterprise Integration Chief. Current assignment, well, he's been here just a year. It comes to us from various assignments. The last appointment was in 2009 with the 1st Cav in Baghdad, but his hobbies, buffalo hunting, and big game fishing. All right. Jason Henneke from Victoria, Texas, future of the Army Operations of the U.S. Army Cyber Command. He's been in this assignment 25 months. Great teammate. Last deployment was 2013-14 in Kabul, Afghanistan. He enjoys buffalo hunting and big game fishing. Colonel Ken Haynes from Reno, Nevada, career signal officer at NetCom. He's the Army Global Modernization Team Director. He's been in the job 1.3 months. Last deployment, 13-14 in Kuwait, and enjoys buffalo hunting and deep sea fishing. Colonel Mark Parker, Army brat, Trade Octicum. I've known Mark for a while from USARAF, but he's been on the job 3 weeks. Favorite deployment was Iraq. And you know how we couch this. What was your favorite deployment, right? There's no favorite in deployment, but that's how we couched it. And enjoys buffalo hunting and deep sea fishing. Manish Patel from PEO EIS, the CIO over there. He's been in the role since 2016, and he's been at the PEO for 6 years, PEO EIS. A great teammate and enjoys buffalo hunting and deep sea fishing. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is, now we're going to give them an applause, but I'm going to make sure you're awake. So we'll give them 1 clap each, right? So so I'll say Colonel Chalfant, clap, right? See, there we go. That's how we check on learning here. So, Colonel Chalfant, very good. So that's how we're going to do it, right? So he gets 3 claps, right? Colonel Chalfant, hold on here. Jason Henneke, now we're getting better here. Colonel Haynes, Colonel Parker, Manish Patel. All right, there's our pedal, folks. All right, so, okay, all right, clap. Now, you didn't come here to listen to me talk because you came here for these folks here, and so we are going to get on with a short overview, no more than 5 minutes each, and then questions and answers, all right? So let's go ahead. Who's first? Chuck.
Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Okay. So as General Yee said, my name is Colonel Chuck Chalfant, and I'm the chief of the Enterprise Integration Division. And one of my main responsibilities is with the migration to JRSS. And there's a lot of pieces involved with this, and each of us is going to talk a little bit about each one. But I'd first like to address the overall picture, starting with the JRSS stacks themselves. One of the things I like to say when I'm trying to explain this to family and friends is, and I know a lot of you probably already know this, but just to level set, I have an analogy I like to use called, I call it the castle analogy. So if you picture the Army network as a big castle with a wall around it, before JRSS, the castle had a lot of doors, and each door was managed by a different entity. And nobody in particular had control over all of the entities. And so there was no uniform standard, there was no understanding of what security levels there were at different points, in that castle. And then what we're trying to do is as we move to JRSS, we're reducing the number of those doors, and we're putting them under a single control authority. And that's not just for the Army, but that's for all of DoD. As we do this, we also are reducing what's known as the attack surface, and so we're eliminating different ways into the network. And what this ends up with is a increased level of security and a more efficient operation as well. The bits and bytes will flow faster and more smoothly as we take out some of these redundant security stacks that are already in place. And as you can see on what I have here on the map is an illustration of where all the stacks are. So prior to JRSS, we've had hundreds of stacks on both Nipper and SIPR side. And what this will reduce down to is 23 Nipper stacks and 25 SIPR stacks in the end. And that will essentially reduce that attack surface and improve our security overall. And I think that's about all I have. So I'm going to help with the 5-minute rule here, and I'll hand it off to Colonel Henneke for the next piece.
All right, next slide, please. And next slide. So the 5 minutes that I've got basically is focused on really kind of giving the status of where we are with 18 and 19 way ahead. And obviously, for those that are not aware of the mandate, DoD mandate is by the end of FY19 to have the migration complete. And migration that we're focused on really is the DISN subscription sites. So the 86 sites that are out there. Clearly, there'll be some areas that don't get migrated by that time, and those are secondary areas. But again, as far as the DoD mandate, which we're focused on and we're driving on right now, is by FY19. So I just want to highlight where we are in terms of overall. And this is the top kind of the view there. You'll see CONUS, you'll see the Europe Theater, SWA, and Pacific. And again, by looking at the 18, you can generally see we have 17 in CONUS we're focused on, 1 in Europe, 7 in SWA, and 9 in Pacific. Fair to understand also is a migration may have several sites underneath that. So when we look at that, for example, in Europe, there's lots of small concerns that make up a lot of these numbers. So a lot of the numbers you'll see asterisks by because they may subsume several different areas, or for example, in the SWA, Buring and Arifjan, one of those is DSS. And so sometimes the charts, some get added on, some get pulled off. So it's one of those things with Chuck and his team, very dynamic weekly updates on what's counting and what's not counting. What I wanted to be is very positive in terms of where we are with this process. This is not easy, first of all. The workforce out there, my hat's off to them as far as the soldiers and civilians and contractors, because this is just one of many things that are going on day to day at a local base, post, camp station that they're having to go through. Planned stuff, such as going through the JRSS, but also unplanned areas, or also real-world network operations. And that's part of this also as we look through this. This is an operation, bottom line. We're going through what's our risk out there, where we are with transition, where we are with communications, because that bottom line, communication is our job, but also what reserve do we have? And that's something to think through as far as how we are in those day-to-day areas. If something happens, what do we do? So catching up where we are on the bottom line up front, by the end of FY17, we'll be 53% complete, 46 sites. And then you can see 18, it's about 20 additional sites, and then lastly, 20 sites goes us into 19. Coming over to the left, FY17, just where we are right now. 38 sites by the end of the FY is completed, will be done, and of those, 46 total DSS sites. And as stated there, one migration will carry multiple sites. You can see kind of where the breakdown is for CONUS and OCONUS also overall. 49 of those sites are at CONUS and 37 are at OCONUS. Looking at generally, just kind of recap the overall strategy, it was focused on pretty much central, south U.S. for our starting point. It was focused on what's the most advanced, taking advantage of the ICANN, the infrastructure, campus area network improvements, what was already done most. So look at that as a start point, and then really working counterclockwise into the southeast. And so right now we're going into the northeast sector for the first part of FY18, and you can see the locations in there. Some like Corpus Christi, again, not a DSS site, will come up in that mix. And again, this is part of the plan that has to be changed based off of availability of the teams, both the service teams, but also the joint teams. And that's one of the large elements is obviously is all costing. By the end of FY19, we lose the joint teams and then have to go into paying it all out of Army pockets. So this is, again, a concern of the leadership is stay on track, stay on schedule, fight through it, and look at how we catch back up where we can. And then coming down in 18, the rest of it goes back up into really more into the northwest area. Looking at OCONUS, for the large part, OCONUS already is advanced in the ICANN area, with the exception really being Pacific. And Pacific is one area that is the #1 focus of the overall Army's direction. Bottom line, Chief of Staff of the Army has all things Pacific, all things Korea right now. And so what we're looking at was, it seems to be mismatched as far as by bumping the FY19 schedule, but in reality is, it's hard to do a migration at the same time it is with the actual ICANN updates. And so The ICANN itself brings you improved capacity and capabilities, so that's focused first for the FY18 period, and then we'll follow on with the overall JRSS migration in Pacific. So in terms of, we may hear some of that saying, this doesn't match up with the chief's priority of saying, it's all Korea, it's all Pacific. That's the kind of the link there. What I'll do, I'll stop there, and I know there's probably going to be some questions in terms of how we look at where we are with this, whether it's organization-wise or just lessons learned, but I'll pass it over to Ken to pick up the next ball.
You know what, let me just provide some additional context here. So if you go back just 2 slides real quick to Colonel Chalfont's slide, and you'll see that, you'll see that those sites are the JRS stacks around the world, right? And so before we can migrate to those stacks have to be activated and ready to go, right? Those 23 or 25 sites, SIPR-NIPR sites. And so getting those stacks up and ready, that's a DISA effort. That's a joint effort, and with a large part of the Army helping to get that going 4 or 5 years ago, but it's actually a DISA effort today. So getting those up first is important before we connect and make those migrations. Getting the infrastructure between those sites up and running is important. And then go ahead forward to 2 slides forward. Then we can migrate those bases to the JRS stack, right? So before all that could happen, these migrations, that infrastructure had to be put in place. And before we even switch the priority of a site to migrate, we have to make sure the campus area network piece is upgraded as well. And so if you're in the 7th SIG CONUS, you know, you're living that today, trying to make that all come together. And so a lot of pieces, and you'll hear Ken Haynes talk about that in a minute, but the context is, before we migrate that base, a lot of things have happened already, to include JRS stack activation, infrastructure upgrades, upgrade of the circuit from the JRS stack to that base, and then the base, local area, the campus area network upgraded, and then we can migrate over. So a lot of things are happening before we even get to this point. And if we were to switch priorities of the sequence of these, we have to know 9 to 12 months in advance that we want to change the sequence to do it as seamlessly as possible. So it's steering a large effort. Thanks. Let's go on to Ken.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. I would like to thank you, sir, General Yi and FCA, for the opportunity today. I'm here representing the U.S. Army Network Enterprise Technology Command. If you were at the keynote yesterday afternoon, you heard John Baker address building in security to our networks, and that's what NetMod is all about. I'm the director of the Army Global Modernization Team, and if you were like me a few months ago when I got the call from John Baker, I didn't know what that was. So the AGMT is an ad hoc organization. We've identified individuals throughout the theaters globally, green suitor engineers and warrant officers that are hyper dedicated to shepherding the JRSS migration progress and NetMod progress throughout the globe. So my role is to lead those great soldiers, to work with these gentlemen here to synchronize our actions, and to identify and tackle those strategic obstacles that come in the way to maintain the momentum of our network modernization efforts. It really is part of a larger team within NetCom, though. We have our G5 plans division that's in the deep fight. They're out there looking at and projecting the resource requirements and capitalizing on the funds that we have. We have our G35 future operations division, which is out there assuring that our dependencies are met ahead of the migrations. We also have our current operations center at Fort Huachuca that's involved with the actual management of our new network that we migrate to. And we work to counterbalance everything between our counterparts at Army Cyber, DISA, our PEO community, and the regional cyber centers to make sure that it's as seamless as possible. We kind of represent this whole process with that 5-legged stool up on the screen. Yesterday you heard John Baker talk about changing the gauge of the train track while you're on the middle of the bridge crossing the river. That's a great analogy, but we prefer internally to use the 5-legged stool. because it shows the dependencies that have to be met before we're able to sit on top of that stool and declare NetMod a success. The first leg and first challenge is us. It's an Army challenge, and that is the installation infrastructure. We have to be very careful and cognizant of the fact that when we go out and look at an installation for a migration, to identify if it will support what we're trying to do for NetMod. 30 years ago, who could have forecasted the requirements for space, heating, cooling, power that would be needed this year to implement JRSS? I would tell you not very many people had that vision. We still have NEC facilities that are quite literally in fortresses built 200 years ago that aren't adequate. So that's the first dependency we have to tackle is what do we need to do for power upgrades, for heating upgrades, for facility upgrades? How do we pay for that, and how can we get that accomplished before our migration schedule? The second leg on that stool is really the PEO-EIS community, and that's the installation campus network. Again, 30 years ago, state-of-the-art technology might have been twisted pair, dumb switches on our networks, and that really doesn't support a modern network. So as we go with these installations and we go through the NetMod process, we're looking at upgrading to modern switches. We're looking at doing fiber optics on the basis, providing path diversity on the basis. And every installation has a different set of standards that they come to the table with. So this is a great opportunity for us to standardize across the force the types of switching equipment that we're using and the transport on the installation to give us capacity to grow in the future. The third leg is that multiple protocol label switching network. This is an amazing technology that gives us a robustness we didn't have before. We're moving all our installations to the MPLS mesh, and that gives us the ability to go away from the traditional routing protocols that we have to engineer into every installation and gives us a dynamic mesh that provides a redundancy to our installations without having to do additional engineering. It gives us an ability to flex the network in an unprecedented way. For example, we recently using MPLS extended our CONUS network to European theater to support our forward deployed forces. So our forces forward don't need to worry about re-imaging computers, joining new Active Directory forests. They reach all of that through the MPLS network back to their home stations at Fort Drum and Fort Riley. And as we continue network modernization, this type of forwarding of our networks will only make it better for our warfighters, and we'll get a lot of cost savings because it will allow us to grow the network as requirements are identified. The fourth leg of the stool is a DISA-led project, and that's the JRSS. It's a pretty big topic. I won't get too much into it. But it's really consolidating and standardizing everything. For the last 30, 40 years, every installation tackled their engineering problems in an individual, unique way, which has caused us, in today's environment, difficulties when we want to expand that or provide different services. JRSS levels the playing field for everybody. It puts us in a modern network, Network 2.0, and gives us a common operational method and reduces our cyber vulnerability footprint. It's also going to save us a lot of money in the long term. As you heard earlier, we're reducing our security architecture. Right now in CONUS, for NetCom, there's about 180 security stacks at all our installations. And what does that mean? We have to buy that hardware. We have to train people to use that hardware. We have to constantly manage it. And we have to find people that's able to digest all that information that those security stacks are providing, which is an impossible task. When we complete JRS and CONUS, we'll only have 11 of those. So we're going from 180 security stacks to 11 in CONUS for NIPRNet. That's pretty amazing. Just in cost savings for lifecycle is a big win for us. The fifth stool on that leg is the joint management system. It's also DISA's project. This is an unprecedented capability for not only NetOps, but for cybersecurity. It provides the services all the way from DoD level to the installation level, a common suite of tools to do that NetOps and C&D mission. This is a challenge, though, because circling that little stool is our base management solution. In the past in the Army, we've had to identify how we're going to manage our switching and networks on the installation, and we've had different solutions in different places come forward. By leveraging the JMS system at an Army level with BMS, we capture and can capitalize on that great capability. But the challenge is being able to identify shortfalls for virtual capability on an installation and funding the application support from DISA to that installation. Bases that have embraced the JMN and BMS so far have done outstanding at supporting their customers. So if you do have the opportunity to look over somebody's shoulder to look into the JMN network and the tools provided, I highly recommend it. So just to wrap up briefly, every installation has its own unique set of challenges that we identify and address. NetMod's imperative for our Army. I truly believe that. It is a paradigm shift in how we do network operations. It's a little scary because it's a different method than what we are used to and we grew up to in the Army. And it is complex, but that's why we got this great team of buffalo hunters up here. When we're not deep sea fishing, we're tackling all these challenging topics.
Hey, thanks. And I just note that Gerald Williams just showed up, so thanks for joining us, Gerald. Smartest guy in the room right now. Right. Go ahead, Mark.
Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to thank AFCEA for hosting this conference. It's a phenomenal event. I'm truly honored to be here. I'd like to thank General Yee for asking me to be on this panel and giving me the opportunity to make everyone else up here look smart. And then I'm honored to be here representing the Cyber Center and General Morrison this morning. I'm going to apologize up front. I am half Italian to my Italian brothers. It's hard for me to talk while seated and not using my hands, but I will do the best I can. You've heard my fellow panelists today talk about their actions and what they're doing. So how does the Cyber COE fit into that? Well, ideas, thoughts, wishes, desires do not get funded. Requirements get funded. So as I've learned very recently, a TICM, and by the way, the guy I replaced is sitting out here in the audience, so Tim, please, no questions. I manage the Army's requirements, and so I'm going to document those requirements so they can get funded. So that's where it all begins, is requirements. That's what gets money. So we look and work those requirements by looking at our gaps, and they're identifying some of the gaps we're talking about now. We do the analysis, we look at the capabilities, we look at our training, and we look at the life cycle of equipment that's out there and work those requirements to eventually get funded to do the things we need to do. So how is that different from things that have been occurring in the past? Well, now we're trying to take a one network approach. So I think if you'd asked my predecessor or you'd asked my shop about 1.5 to 2 years ago, we'd have told you that we were the capability managers of requirements for tactical networks. And so we've changed that mindset to say, nope, we own it all. From the enterprise to the tactical, we are the TICM for all networks, and we will own all requirements so that we can get those requirements funded. And so how does that work across the enterprise? What's our role? Well, as the recent studies have shown, I think we realize as far as architecture goes that our networks have been very, very good at doing what we needed them to do the last 15 years. They work very well in a static environment, fighting a counterinsurgency fight. But as we've looked into the future, we've seen that the network needs to adapt and the network needs to change. So we will have to work that architecture with our partners to make sure we get that architecture built. And once you get it built, you've got to have the right requirements in place. And so what are some of those requirements? Well, they're frankly fairly simple. It's what you would expect, a common user experience. Whether you're at a computer, in your office, in a tent, in a mobile vehicle, or on a handheld device, you're looking for a common user experience. You're looking for single end-to-end identity. You don't want to log in with different credentials in 5 different locations. You want that identity to follow you through the network. And additionally, we're looking for end-to-end security. Well, that comes back to creating the one network we're talking about and that we're trying to get to here with my partners. And that network, and I've got my boss's talking points right here, has to be resilient, redundant, protected, easy to use, highly mobile, interoperable, tactical network that plugs into that enterprise network that allows us to get that end-to-end common usability. And it's got to be sustainable. Well, how are you sustained? You're a program of record, you have valid requirements, and you're in the funding streams. And so I think part of what we're struggling with is doing that. I don't think we've been capturing those requirements and documenting them. And so the last part I'll talk about network modernization, this is a bit off script and it's not on my slide, is only having been in the job a few weeks, the one thing I have not seen yet is, are we modernizing how we deliver networks? And I'm talking from the perspective of just a signal officer for the last 25 years, although one of my company commanders is sitting in the audience over here, General Augusta. So if you have any complaints with me, you can blame him for the mentorship. Is how are we delivering networks to our users? Have we modernized how we plan? Let's start with how we design, plan, model and simulate networks, install them, operate, maintain them, and defend them. Are we modernizing that? We're going to always modernize equipment. We are always going to modernize our kit. We are going to work our training. But frankly, we also need to look at how we operate to deliver those networks to our users. We have got to take an approach to modernize that also. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to struggle as things become more complex, more network of things, more harder to defend. We have to look at how we modernize our network delivery to our users. So I'm going to save a few minutes also and turn it over to Manish.
Thanks, Mark. Real quick, so if you were to assemble this panel a year ago, we wouldn't have had Cyber COE up here on this panel. And it's because when we modernize networks nowadays, we just go out and buy stuff, right? Without, as Mark said, requirements. And so requirements at the end of the day is what drives our ability to justify spending money and palming for the money. In years past, we just put money aside, but as the budget's gotten tighter, we've really had to justify directly to the Hill at that level with our staffers, talking to staffers about what we're doing. And so bringing the requirements people into it made all the sense in the world. So for the past year, we've been working very closely with Cyber COE to integrate their efforts into a more holistic effort to modernize the network. So thanks, Mark. Good, Manish.
Thanks, sir. Good morning, everyone. So seeing as I'm the last buffalo in the herd here, so I'm gonna try to keep my comments brief so we can get to the Q&A portion, for which I'm sure everybody's
Buffalo
looking
Hunter.
forward to. Buffalo Hunter, sorry. Sometimes it's hard to know which one. Colonel Haynes spoke to the security aspect of what we're trying to do with NetMod. What I wanted to also to point out in terms of what we're trying to collectively do, ultimately what we're trying to do is set the conditions to deliver enterprise services across the Army to all users, wherever they may be. One of the areas that we get involved from a PEO perspective is with the ICANN and bringing capacity into the equation, right? So in terms of lines of effort, if you recall some of the G6 publications, in addition to delivering enterprise services, we need to secure the environment, as folks have talked about already, as well as build capacity. Colonel Henneke showed you the slides for the JRSS migrations for the respective post-CONUS and OCONUS. What we do from the PEO standpoint is get ahead of that and do the upgrades that are necessary at the various post-campus stations, both CONUS and OCONUS. So that means increasing the capacity to 10 gig in terms of the interconnects, as well as capacity up to 1 gig to users. In addition to that, another key piece is making sure we have, as Colonel Parker mentioned, resilience, redundancy, bringing path diversity into the equation as well, so that we don't have single points of failure wherever you may be. That's kind of the what. In terms of how we do that, what we've tried to do is change the model that had been used previously, where we went installation by installation in terms of how we awarded contracts. That proved to be unsustainable because it created a situation where we couldn't get to all the posts in a timely manner and wind up having to come back and doing tech refreshes at sites before we get to modernize others. So to eliminate that potential of haves and have-nots, if you will, what we've done over the last several years is embrace the NetMod concept. And the key themes there is to try to make our dollars go farther by leveraging commodity buys in terms of the hardware that we acquire, as well as getting speed to the field. Trying to build momentum to get the hardware into the field and operational as quickly as possible. Some of the challenges I'll talk about, I talk about synchronizing activities. There's a lot of coordination that needs to be done. We're part of the puzzle in terms of making sure we have the JRSS in place, the ICANN upgrades, all that to support the migrations. A lot of moving parts, so keeping that synchronized is a challenge. Another couple areas, as you can well imagine, in terms of challenges for us, is changing priorities, funding uncertainties, and then, of course, operational realities, especially when you're talking about trying to do these types of modernization activities in SWA, Europe, or PAC now. So those continue to be challenges. What we've tried to do is be flexible, adaptable, and having the contracting instruments in place so we can apply dollars that may become available wherever they need to be applied, whether it's PAC or Europe, whatever the case may be, having the capability to respond in a timely and organized manner. So I'll stop there and turn it over back to General Yee.
So there you have it, the higher level overview of the 5 Buffalo Hunters. And as you can see, there's a lot going on. And so anyone that's experienced a base migration might be thinking, well, why didn't they do this? Or why didn't they think of that? Absolutely fair questions to ask as you're undergoing what we're calling today network modernization, which is really the infrastructure upgrade for the Army's enterprise network. But let me tell you, there are weekly meetings, there are meetings between the weeks, and there are lots of coordinated sessions with these 5 stakeholders and then some to get after it. And below the level, at the campus level, there are meetings with mission partners. If it's CONUS, it's 7 SIG. If it's OCONUS, it's the 311th, or it's USER, G6. So there's a lot of coordination happening below that as well. So to let you know, that there is a bigger picture, that it's all coordinated. We do have a number of questions that have already come in. We're already at almost 20 questions with not even the first question up. So we're going to try to get through these kind of quick so that we can get more questions. So I ask you panel members to just give us a 2 or 3 minute response and move on so that we get these questions in here. So first question, and this is for the whole panel. What are the 1 or 2 lessons learned that your organizations have learned in this process? And start with Chuck. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. So I think one of our biggest ones is resourcing challenges. As everybody knows, we've been in a continuing resolution situation for years now, and that's made it very difficult to properly fund all this. And so in a lot of cases, we've had delays that were caused because we didn't have the resources to get the things in place in time. As Ken mentioned, we got a 5-legged stool here, and I kind of question that analogy nowadays because a stool will stand just fine with 4 or 3, but we need all 5 in this case. So I'm thinking like a chain of 5 links maybe. But what amazes me is how hard it is to keep all these things in place in order to get to that final stage of migrating a base to JRSS. And it just doesn't take a whole lot to get in the way and cause things to start to slip, which just saying it kind of is like fingernails on a chalkboard to me, because that's just, I've been conditioned well by this point. So, but I think those are the 2 major lessons that we've found so far.
Thanks, Chuck. Jason.
I think the part looking at, well, this is end-to-end operation. So from the leadership StratCom early to tell them what's going to happen there, and go walk them through it day by day, what's expect. And then all the way down to the individual training. Because everything we do, again, this is an Army operation, so training, whether it's the civilians, contractors, or military, how they're trained, and picking the right workforce training that's going to be there when the actual migration happens, not the ones who are out the door just because you have a slot open and you send someone in there. Last 2 areas would probably be looking at permissions. So every NEC, post-base camp station has different permission sets, and so the idea was one piece of paper will give you permission access. That doesn't always work. So it goes back to that. And then last part, it really is a matter of redundancy. When you're going through this, you're going to have legacy and modernized stacks, legacy and modernized procedures, legacy and modernized workforce. So just understand that as far as how the resources are actually, as Chuck said, it's a finite amount, but it's actually going to increase. So this is the part that's hard for leaders to understand. I'm going to pay more now to get something better and more efficient in the long run. That's it, sir.
Thanks, Jason. Ken?
Well, sir, there's really one thing that keeps me up at night, and see if it resonates here, is applications. Applications have been the hardest lesson learned, I think, for everybody that has dealt with migrations. Just like we haven't tended to our facilities for the last 30 years as we should have, our applications that have been built, that have been paid for already, weren't optimized to work in a modern network environment. They don't operate in the layer 6 level for a wide area network. So we have to analyze these applications when we discover them, and as a community either find a way to pay for coders to recode those applications, move that application to a data center that is capable of handling it, or what we're doing as a Band-Aid, putting a dedicated firewall on the installation so those applications and servers can still communicate on the enterprise. I don't think that was a second order effect that anybody had anticipated until we actually started doing the migrations. So the operational lesson learned that I would ask everybody to take away is you really have to look at your applications and do that analysis to see if it's a layer 7 application that's using a back-end SQL server, if it can operate in a modern network that has some inherent latency due to our security postures.
Thanks, Ken. And so, if we migrated 20 bases, we've done more than that. We have learned 20 different lessons because every one of those 20 bases are different. Back to what I said earlier about each of the DUMs growing up on their own separate installations. And so, if there were 20 bases, we've learned 20 plus lessons about how the network needs to be modernized. And so there's some standardization that's taking place. And back to what I said earlier, the pain you feel is, weakness leaving the network, right? So,
Sir, if I could add, I think that what you just said also highlights the need to do this. The challenges that we're learning at each base and how different they are is exactly why we need to do this.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Mark?
Sir, I just need clarification on something. I never have killed a buffalo, but I did get a deer with a car once. Is that close enough? Just know if I get credit. So as far as operational lessons learned from my TICM section, again, having been in the job just a short time, it's just the inherent struggle between the acquisition systems and our ever-increasing pace of technological change. I think we all understand that the acquisition system in JSIDS is not fast, it's not agile, it's not adaptable, yet our adversaries are. And the change in pace of technology is. So how do we just design requirements, because again, I'm in the requirements business, that allow that flexibility, yet are still written well enough that program managers can develop and design solutions to meet those. So it's just kind of an inherent struggle of needing a lot of detail, but as soon as you get a lot of detail into something, you lock yourself into current spirals of technology. Yet if you write something so generic, you can't settle on anything. So it's a kind of constant struggle of, hey, I want to do this, but I've got to get down to something, and how do we still stay fast and agile to deliver those technological solutions by providing the requirements that then get turned into programs or records that these gentlemen can go out and make happen. Sure.
Thanks, Mark. And just in between, so when you think about a program of record and you think about the acquisition process, not here to talk about that, but it's a very deliberate process. And although this is not a program of record, this is a very deliberate process that we undertake. And the fact that from an idea not that long ago, when you think about it, with the regional security stacks that became joint regional security stacks, to where we're at today is quite remarkable, because those stacks are up and running. Those 9+ JRS stacks are up and running. All the stacks for Nipper have been purchased and are in the process of being installed. The zipper stacks, they are being installed today. And so when you think about the impact of what is happening and the amount of time that's taken, it's actually not that long when you think about the more traditional process of identifying requirements, validating, testing, et cetera. And let me tell you, this undergoes a lot of testing before we put a single user on the network. So when you think about it in that context, it's actually, been fairly fast, with plenty of oversight along the way, by the way. So, Manish.
Yes, sir. So from the acquisition community, so I have to, as Colonel Chalfant said, talk about resourcing in terms of the challenges. I touched upon some of the lessons learned earlier, and I'll just dovetail off of that. Having contracting instruments where we have the flexibility. Yes, we're not a program of record, but in many ways, we need to operate as a large program of record, given the scope of the work that we're talking about. Some of the challenges that we've got and lessons learned is trying to find the sweet spot in terms of maximizing our buying power in terms of the hardware that's necessary, while also making sure we have what's necessary with the deployment and installation teams, so we don't run into a situation where we've bought more than we can deploy, or conversely, we have the teams ready to install, but not the hardware to put in place. So finding the sweet spot in terms of the dollars that are available and what that translates into in terms of purchasing for the hardware that's necessary, as well as making sure we have the installation teams that are available to put that in place in advance of all the migration activities that are going to happen. So we've tried to, as best we can, factor that into our planning. So that's some of the things that we've learned along the way, kind of fine-tuning the process and trying to make that as smooth and painless as possible for the folks in the field.
Thanks, Manish. So here's a question for Jason. As the Army migrates to JRSS, how do you coordinate with Joint Forces headquarters to ensure possible command and control at each echelon?
That's a buffalo hunting question, definitely there. That goes back to, and it's probably in one of the, I'll make one ploy. I am not a signal officer or a network officer. I'm actually a FA-59, a strategist. So in terms of coming into this job, it has taken me 25 months to kind of understand the lay of the headquarters in terms of the JFHQ, what their role is, what DISA's role is, what USCC role is, Cyber Command, and then again, of course, what the CIO staff role is. So I think part there goes back to early on communicating where we are with each phase. Part of this right now that we are looking at is more and more called phase 0, going ahead of each site, going ahead of each area, and laying out who is the current cybersecurity service provider, what is their current visibility, situation awareness of circuits, different traffic going through there, because that's a large part is these bases and campsites are getting harder and harder to migrate because for years now, everything's just been plugged in. And so from the DISA JFHQ level, they see a site and it's the same as the Air Force or Navy. And there again, they're 8 to 9 years ahead of us. And so we're catching up in the Army. So the complexity for them to understand, it often takes contacting DISA every day and then leaving at the end of the day where that, because bottom line, these centers are not 24/7. So at 5 o'clock, whatever happened at the end of that day, that's kind of Groundhog Day. They drop it and they start again the next day. So it's understanding of that you're dealing with the workforce here, even at DISA level, that looks at this as, okay, we finished the trouble ticket that day, I come back in the next day, and everything's green. So it's a matter of understanding, having that day-to-day transition with them saying, I start this problem, and until I finish it and close it, the problem's not finished. It's probably one of the challenges as Army Cyber moves out of the Beltway, how to sustain that contact with JFHQ Doden up there. And also, JFHQ Doden is going more and more into a forward presence. So they're going to continue to look at their headquarters having a JFHQ headquarters, but also each combatant command having a forward element to support that region. So understanding they're changing too. So again, because bottom line, they're very clear. They don't have it figured out yet either. So where's DISA, where's JFHQ DODN, where's DOD CIO, where's USCC all fit into that? 4 different layers there.
No, I think it's fair. And I'll say that Jason's probably the smartest non-signal officer acting like a signal officer we have, so the disclaimer didn't really help, Jason, so that's why you're here. All right.
Probably am a buffalo hunter, actually.
There you go. There you go. Question for Ken. How is latency in JRSS migrations user experience being measured and improved?
That's a Buffalo question, too. So we first experienced this at Redstone, and we didn't have tools to do that. We had some basic tools to do the analysis to identify what's going on in the network path that are pretty traditional, but we didn't have a tool to look at what the application was doing. So what Netcom is doing now is they're doing it at a pilot at Fort Bragg and a few other places, is using a riverbed technology that actually monitors what a application is doing, and the software is able to identify what code in the software, what procedure calls are actually causing a latency to that application. So this tool, once we get it deployed, will be able to identify to a code developer, this is the problem that's causing you in your application. But the challenge, again, goes back to how are we going to pay for updating code? If you look at a program of record, that money to develop the code was already spent. There's not an extra pool of money to go back and fix code. And a lot of home brewed solutions have the same problem. So we're continuing to find that kind of policy decision. I work with ASALT quite a bit on the POR systems on how we're going to do that, because the stay-behind firewalls that we're putting up, they have a life cycle end date where the vendor won't support it anymore and it won't comply with RMF. And once those routers hit that date, the application is a risk. So that's where we're going forward with Netcom. The application that we're testing through Riverbed works very well, and I think within the next year it'll give us some great information that we'll be able to provide people.
Okay, thanks, Ken. All right, here's one for Chuck. How do you make sure that each unit base is ready for JRSS migration?
So what we do is we have the migration itself consists of a whole bunch of steps, culminating in a set of 10 authorized service interruptions that complete out the migration. But back in the very beginning of it, you have to do a discovery phase. And so what we do is we do the discovery phase as early as makes sense. Because you can't just go as early as possible, because if you do it really early, then things will change on the network, and then by the time you come around to do the migration, you will find that things have changed, and that will cause other problems for you. And so finding that sweet spot has been something that the Joint Migration Team, which is it's a contracted element out of DISA, has been working to find, and so they go in there and actually do the discovery. The good news is discovery means that it's easier for them to get access, because they're just doing a read-only access and looking around without actually having to go in and touch stuff and make changes. But that's the key, is getting in there, and for our migrations, we're actually kind of calling it a phase 0, especially when it comes to the organizational networks, which is a whole different topic. But that's the key, is getting in there and taking a look and seeing what to expect, and then planning for that. And sometimes we adjust our migration timeline for it. Right now, I think we have about a quarter, 3-month time period for migration. But some of those have stretched out to 6 months because of complexity and things that we've learned during the discovery phase.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. Here's one for Manish. So how do you keep pace with new IT capabilities for an enterprise as large as the Army?
Okay, so I think the acquisition community, of course, has an important role. As Colonel Parker mentioned, we have to be faster. We have to be more nimble and adaptive to new requirements and the technologies that are potential solutions for that. But I would submit that it's not sufficient just to look at it from an acquisition standpoint on how quickly we can acquire capabilities. To get it to the field becomes a team sport. NetMod is a good example of that. Yeah, we can buy the necessary hardware, but putting it in place, making it operational, involves a lot more coordination, communication amongst the various stakeholders to put it in place. The other dimension I would add to that is kind of a willingness collectively, being prepared, willing, and able to in some cases change how we conduct business to adapt to the technology that we want to put in place, as opposed to trying to shape the technology. Yes, it's great technology that, when we see it from our industry partners, but if we try to fundamentally change how it works, then we potentially do a disservice to that technology as well as what we want to try to achieve operationally. So I would say that would be another area to look at it, kind of look in the mirror in terms of how we do our business with evolving technology. And then the last piece kind of related to that is understanding that we have so many layers of technology, within the Army. We tend to be hoarders. We don't get rid of legacy IT, and sometimes that becomes a constraint on the new technology that we're trying to strive to put in place. It can drive up complexity. Complexity increase typically comes with cost increase, and as I said earlier, that could be at a disservice to that technology down the road.
So we're just, buffalo hunters for the infrastructure, but you just heard Manish talk about other legacy stuff that's on the network as well. And so at some point, well, we're already doing some of that already with divestiture of other areas. Here's a question for Mark, and I'm not sure there's a good answer, Mark, so don't beat yourself up here. How will this migration assist the ultimate decision to merge SIPR and NIPR? Will we never achieve a single network until we go full out classified?
No. That's right. The goal is obviously one network. And so that leads into other questions as we begin to move forward and look at the requirements for colorless networks. And eventually you talk about one network delivering multiple classifications, not just one network and collapsing to one NIPR network, one SIPR network, and one TS network, one enclave or mission partner environment. But eventually collapsing to, no kidding, one network that allows software-defined networking with virtual machines to deliver one box doing multiple classifications. So you are down to one network. So I don't know when that's going to occur. I know we're looking at trying to write those requirements and develop those things as we look in the future, but to no kidding, take a look at the next generation and think about how we approach things differently. I've got a network. What it delivers should be able to be software defined. And so that I don't need 4 laptops on a desk delivering 4 different networks, when I ought to be able to have one network connection through one device that delivers whatever I need, whether it is a classified network, an unclassified network, a mission partner network, through virtualization and virtual machines that gets us to one network, one device, common user experience, single identity that's resilient and redundant for the users. So when that's going to occur, I don't know, but I'm probably the guy that has to write that requirement.
All right, thanks. All right, here's a question. In what way is the network modernization in line with NATO efforts to create interoperability with coalition partners? And I'm not looking at a lot of enthusiastic folks but maybe Mark, since you just came from Europe.
Sir, I did. But I can tell you from the TICM perspective, as we write the requirement documents for the various things inside the Army, we're working on the common operating environment, we're working on common computing environments, we're working on the unified transport layer. As we write those documents and requirements, we all have the requirements in there to be compliable or compatible and interoperable with JIE, and we specifically write in there about mission partner, allies and partners inside our network requirements to have that interoperability. So we are writing those requirements in the documents. It's back to some of those technical solutions to do that. So from the requirement perspective, absolutely that is a bedrock foundational requirement in everything we write, is that interoperability, up, down, left, and right. The specifics of that get into the particular technological solutions that the program managers our folks at POS, EIS, and C3T are working to develop some of the technologies in terms of gateways and those things that will allow greater interoperability. I wish our partners from USER were here, Rob Parker, the other smarter, younger Parker, that could answer questions as they deal with the NATO fight every day.
But not as good looking.
Yeah, well, that's a matter of opinion. I'll go with yours, sir.
All right. Hey, let me try to squeeze a few more questions in here. So what factors contributed to how long a base migration takes to complete? Some go fast, while others don't. And this question is for Ken.
Thank you, sir. There are those dependencies on a five-legged stool really drive what takes a base longer or shorter. Some bases have gone under their 90-day allotted limit that we thought would be complicated, like Fort Belvoir we thought would be complicated, but they did it in under 30 days. Redstone turned out to be very complicated, and it's still going under migration 240 days later. So it's those dependencies. If we run into a problem during netmod with power, for example, it could take months for us to fix and upgrade the power to a facility. Fort Knox is an extraordinary complex environment just because of their mission with Human Resources Command and Recruiting Command. We have to really have a detailed engineering plan before we go in. So we're actually adding a 90-day cycle to Fort Knox just to do the engineering. And while we're executing it, there are other things that can delay it as well. The FORCECOM units, they could have warfighting exercises that come up on the calendar. And for reasons beyond our control, we didn't schedule that migration around that warfighter. So we'll have to do a pause on our networks for migrations to allow for that interrupted service to our warfighters. So there are factors that determine how long an installation is going to take. And it's up to these great fishermen up here to tackle those buffaloes and hunt them
You're going fishing for buffalo?
well in advance.
All right, thanks. All right, question from Manish here. Are there any significant hardware or software bottlenecks causing problems where industry might help?
Nothing that comes to mind in terms of hardware or software bottlenecks. No, sir.
All right.
We're always looking at technology. I mean, that's a constant endeavor. What's next? But in terms of the ongoing execution, there's nothing that I can speak to.
But what we can use, and which is why we're here, is just being exposed to the way we could do things different in the future, right? And so if you show us something today, we may not be ready to implement that next week or next year or 2 years from now, but maybe 5 years down the road, we'll be ready for it. And it's based upon the requirements, the funding piece, and the enterprise. The Army's a large enterprise, and so if you're talking about upgrading 1 million laptops and desktops Windows 10, it sounds pretty simple, but it's actually pretty hard. And so steering a large organization like the Army does need your help with getting in front of us in these forums and outside these forums to ensure that we are aware of how things could be for us, right?
Sir, I was just going to add to that. I think technological solutions to all our problems exist. I just think our ability to adapt and adjust and take advantage of those is where we are struggling. I don't think, as Minister was saying, I don't think we have any technological problems that the solutions don't exist for. It's our ability to take advantage of those and field them when you look at the size, breadth, and scope of our enterprise.
So one thing on that, I'd like to add on that. I think part of this, just to add on to Mark's part, is besides processes, also the overall, and I don't want to bash risk management framework, but it's overall processes that are out there that have historically existed with a certain lockstep mindset. So it's also going back to look at how certain things are accredited and what you can use for best business practice out there that says, okay, this is already being used out there, and we're using it for the same purpose and process on the same type of network. go ahead and take the reciprocity, go ahead and take those current security controls and bring them over, as opposed to wait potentially 6 months to a year plus to bring something on. So it's also a matter of how we accredit and just bring over those already approved security measures outside of DoD into the DoD.
That's a good point. And don't get me wrong, just because something is new doesn't mean it's going to take a long time to get into our system or our network. We know that's not true. In fact, when we're building out already JRSS 1.5 and JRSS 2.0, we're already putting money aside in the POM for that, not knowing what specific vendor that we're going to get. We're saying that we know we need a certain capability, and so when it comes time, a year and a half or 2 years from now, to upgrade parts of the JRSS stack, we don't know that vendor today. We don't. And we don't know the technology today, because by then we know that the technology to do certain things on the network, whether it's a sensor, will have evolved and improved. And so at the time that we're ready to pull the trigger and say, hey, we need a particular upgrade of the capability, then the money is set aside for that capability to get, best of breed on the market at that time. We're running short on time here, so I want to ask and we're going to hang around afterwards because there's a lot more questions here that we didn't get to. But I want to ask each of the panel members to just do a real quick, 1 minute wrap up, starting from Manish, and come back this way. What do you want the audience to know?
All right. So, so again, thank you for inviting myself to participate. What I would say is, the PEO, stands as a partner amongst the team, working with CIO G6, Netcom, our cyber, of course, to bring this capability to the field. As I mentioned in the opening remarks, in our eyes, it's all about getting speed to the field and maximizing our buying power to get capability out there faster. So we're looking for all the various contracting instruments that'll enable us to do that, whether it's the traditional model of buying and fielding hardware, or potentially looking at consuming IT as a service. I know more leaders are looking at that, where we don't want to necessarily own the IT in order to be able to better keep pace with the change in technology, pushing some of that responsibility to the service providers in that type of a model. So we're going to continue to explore that and look at that as we go forward.
Mark, thanks.
Sure. Again, thanks everyone for coming this morning. Thanks for the opportunity to be up here and to learn a lot from my fellow panel members. I will just highlight 2 things. Again, it all comes down to requirements. I know requirements are difficult to do, they're painful to write, but requirements get funded. Desires, wishes, fantasies generally do not, and definitely not with sustainable dollars. So I think some of the struggles you're seeing in network modernization is not having those requirements properly documented, properly in the POM process to get properly resourced. And then the last thing I will say is I come back to, we must modernize how we deliver networks. We're going to continue to equip and do those other things, but we have got to modernize how we design, plan, model, simulate, install, operate, maintain, and defend networks. The technology is always going to change on us, but the processes and tools we use to do that have also got to be modernized, or we're going to continue to struggle, and I feel like always be a little bit behind the 8 ball to deliver what our users need. Sure, thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Go ahead, Ken.
Sir, again, thank you for the opportunity today. For a key takeaway for this panel and for the audience, the most critical thing when we do NetMod is communications. Not just amongst the panel here, but all the way down to our installation stakeholders, our senior mission commanders. The more we communicate what is transpiring on our networks with NetMod, what MPLS brings to the fight, how JRSS improves our defense, they get buy-in to what we're doing and are an active participant the more we communicate. And it gets us to that Network 2.0, and the Army of the future is able to grow where we want to go.
Thanks. Jason.
Sir, also appreciate the chance to hunt buffalo out here with you, and we'll continue to do that. Just want to leave the audience with really two things, and each of these is a subset of 3 areas. So There'll be 6 total things, so just stay with me. The bottom line, our cyber is the newest one on the floor here, and there's a reason why. We are under attack. It is an operational network that we're running right now, so just be aware of that. There are adversaries out there daily coming after us. So that's one area. A couple in the audience here, we have some new 17 cyber operations officers, new areas. So it's a change of a mindset of this is an operations now. With that, we have to aggressively defend the network. And aggressive means we can't do things that we have in the past. We can't just see a sensor, is it green or is it red? We have to go out and do things out there, hunt, and just like we said, hunting the buffalo. We're hunting the enemy. And lastly on that right now looks at the capabilities. We have to do things better in terms of a Department of Defense and Army and aggressively bring on capabilities. So how are we going to do that? It really comes down to, and the one thing that we all grew up here in the Army, it comes down to it is the people. It's all IT, it's all networks, but it's the people. So getting the right people, and not just certified, it's education also. So you can look at, I get all the certs on the wall. I got that 5 years ago, and I do 40 hours a year of certs, and I'm good, right? That mindset there is gone. It's about education now, how people are educated constantly and reading and learning. Also the processes. Your processes have to change. How we do things in the past cannot carry on. But lastly, and just as important as the people, is the partnership. As General Yee said, our cyber comes into this with a newness of this, but what we're bringing in as the cyber portion is the service delivery, the services, the IT networks, but also the headquarters of both the service commands, but also the combatant commands out there. So it takes a commander to do commander's network business, and that's what this really is commander's business, not just the 6s anymore. You have to have the G3, the G2, the G6, but ultimately a commander makes the decision on, I'll spend money on that. So that's it, sir.
Thanks, Jason. 6 things for 8 o'clock morning panel for the audience, remember? All right, appreciate that. All right, Chuck?
So I would submit to you that most of the folks in this room that have anything to do with this effort really feel like this is something we're doing for the Army. But I'm pretty confident that if you talk to any of your non-signal friends out there, that they would feel more like this is something we're doing to them. And so that is something that we've got to be keenly aware of and sensitive to, because we're not the mission. What we're doing here is not the mission. We are an enabler of the mission. Finally, I'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to be a part of this panel and among these distinguished professionals. When I was a lieutenant on the demolition range blowing stuff up, I never thought I'd be here talking about modernizing Army networks, so thank you.
And the music starts to come on, right? And then check on learning, how many legs of the stool? Yeah, right, okay, there you go. All right, so as you can see, a difficult problem set. A lot going on, and I tell you, we got the right people helping us out here. Just when we think we're on glide path, another challenge comes up, and so we couldn't do it without our industry partners. And if you look at JRSS, it's all COTS. So our industry is absolutely a part of our network every single day. So thanks to our industry partners. Thanks to AFCEA for hosting this. Great panel, great event this past week. Thank you all for joining us in the Buffalo Hunt. And remember, the pain you feel is weakness leaving the network. And let's give our panel members a hand.
Please welcome back to the stage Mike Warlick to thank them on behalf of AFCEA and our audience.
This may be a little redundant, but how about another big hand for the Buffalo Hunters? I've made notes on every one of these speakers, and I really want to read them to you, but I'm not going to do it because they did a phenomenal job wrapping up their panel. General Yee, thank you very much for putting this panel together.
You're welcome.
General Yee called me about 3 months ago, and he said, I'd like to put together a panel. There's not enough visibility for the CIO's office. And he turned to Jessica Smith sitting right here, and she worked with him and this fine group to get them together to do this today. Thank you very much. We're now going to move into a break on the exhibit floor, so this is your last real chance to visit your industry partners out there, so we want you to take advantage of that. In addition, there's a engagement theater this morning on the Cyber District panel, and that's really the heartbeat of what's going on in the community, so you might want to pay attention to that. The wing boards tell the story, but I want to remind you of 2 more things. General Crawford will be here at 1300 today for the final keynote. He actually is going to arrive at 10, so he'll be in the building for a few hours, I think, once he arrives. And lastly, don't forget search that I mentioned to you, the education early this morning. You may hear it one more time, but it's January 17th and 18th, and it'll be right here. Just mark your calendars and see what falls out from there. The keynote, the lunch will be served like yesterday. I mentioned that earlier. It'll be ready to go later this morning. And we want you to have a great day, and we'll see you back here at 1300.